My parents and my brother died in a car crash. I lived only because I was riding home with family friends at night, in another car 2 blocks away. But the story did not begin at the intersection where their lives ended. It began months earlier, beneath the chandeliers of the Four Seasons in Boston, when applause thundered and my father raised a glass to crown my brother Brandon with $75 million, a new Tesla, and our mansion worth $13 million. From the shadows of the back row, my throat tightened and my palms cold with sweat. That was when a stranger slipped a white envelope into my hands, a letter that carried a truth powerful enough to unravel everything they believed. My name is Nathan Harrison, and I had spent 20 years in the shadow of my older brother. Brandon, 4 years older, had always been the golden child of the family, a charismatic rising politician who collected luxury watches and wore suits that cost more than I could earn in half a year. My father, Charles, 52, was the owner of Harrison Global Developments, a meticulous man who collected architectural journals and measured success in dollars. My mother, Linda, 50, was a literature professor at a local college, sharp-tongued, intellectual, quoting classics with ease, but cutting down anyone who failed her standards. And me? I was always the second son, the one who kept a private journal and chose to observe instead of speak. Our suburban Boston home was always full of ambition. A large brick mansion overlooking the lake, every room arranged to perfection. At the mahogany dining table I always sat at the far end while my parents and Brandon discussed his achievements, his plans, his bright future. The clinking of silverware against porcelain blended with their laughter. Whenever I tried to add something, the topic had already moved on. I learned my silence was more comfortable for everyone. I still remember being 14. Brandon had just been accepted into a program for gifted students. My father gathered the family, lifted a glass, and toasted what it meant to be a Harrison of superiority, leadership, brilliance. Then his eyes turned to me, and he reminded me I was lucky to have at least passed gym class. The laughter that followed even my mother's restrained smile was worse than the words themselves. That pain didn't come from the comment alone, but from the reality behind it. They never imagined I could be anything more. My mother often urged me to be more like my brother. Her voice was calm, but every remark carved itself into my memory. At 16, I worked shifts at a local diner, trying to save for something of my own. My clothes smelled of frying oil when I came home. One afternoon, as I left for work, Brandon lounged on the couch while our parents praised him yet again. His smirk deepened when he threw a jab about how I smelled. Each remark like that cut me deeper and piled up inside me, a weight pressing on my chest that never lifted. At night I lay awake, writing scattered fragments in my journal, small victories, humiliations, fleeting thoughts I didn't want to lose. Only my grandfather, Edward Harrison, 78, saw me differently. He had built the family company decades earlier, a former lawyer turned philanthropist who had created an empire from nothing. He was quieter than my father, a man who believed in people more than profit. At his lake house, he never asked about grades or accomplishments. His eyes lit with genuine interest when he asked what I thought about, what I dreamed of, what made me happy. On his porch overlooking the water, with the smell of tobacco from his pipe around us, he once placed his wrinkled hand on my shoulder and told me not to mistake my parents' blindness for truth. He insisted I had something my brother didn't, and that one day I would understand when the moment came. I didn't fully grasp what he meant, but his words never left me. Life at home felt like a contest where I was never allowed to win. My father groomed Brandon like a soldier for greatness, taking him to board meetings as a teenager, letting him sit in on business deals, telling every guest in our house that Brandon was the future of the Harrison name. I was never invited to those meetings. Instead, I was told to mow the lawn, run errands, or stay out of sight, as if my presence was inconvenient. As we grew older, the gap widened. Brandon's acceptance to Stanford was celebrated in our home like a national holiday. My mother threw a party that same evening with catering and champagne. The clink of glasses echoed through the halls as I stood by the wall, feeling like a ghost among the living. Strangers congratulated me as if I must be proud, but their words slid off me like rain on glass. By 19, I had learned not to expect love or approval from my parents. I worked multiple jobs, hiding my savings in a metal jar under my bed. While Brandon returned from summers abroad with stories of Europe and Michelin-starred restaurants, I spent mine on warehouses' floors, palms blistered, back aching under the weight of boxes. Still, their judgment followed me in every family gathering. My mother's eyes chased me down hallways. Brandon's laughter reminded me of how effortless his life seemed compared to mine. By the time his graduation approached, I was braced for the humiliation I knew would come. There was never a question whether they would favor him again, only how public and painful it would be for me this time. My father repeated that I would never amount to anything if I kept dwelling on past failures, claiming I always abandoned things halfway. My mother sighed, as if agreement had become her only role. I was ready to swallow my pride again as they raised Brandon up as the jewel of the Harrison family. Brandon's graduation day carried the weight of expectation long before anyone stepped into the ballroom of the Four Seasons in Boston. Florists hurried between tables arranging lilies, while waiters balanced trays of champagne flutes. The scent of fresh pastries mixed with flowers, filling the golden hall beneath glittering chandeliers. My father adjusted his cufflinks with silent precision, rehearsing the words he would deliver to hundreds of guests. My mother oversaw the final details, her eyes sharp with excitement, as if this was her own crowning moment. Hundreds of people filled the seats, professors from my mother's college, my father's business partners, and Brandon's political acquaintances. They had not come merely to honor a graduate. They had come to witness the coronation of a chosen heir of the Harrison Empire. I sat at the far end of the room near the service entrance, surrounded by distant relatives who were little more than decoration for the occasion. My suit was one of Brandon's old ones, altered to fit me, still faintly scented with his cologne. Even here, I wore what he had already cast aside. From across the hall I saw my family shining at the center table. Brandon accepted congratulations with the confidence of someone who had always believed this day was his. My parents stood close to him, their faces radiant with pride they had never shown from me. When my father stepped onto the stage with a microphone, silence fell. His voice rang strong as he spoke about legacy, about the future of Harrison Global Developments under Brandon's leadership. $75 million, a Tesla at the Boston mansion worth $13 million, all of it was declared his. Each number landed inside me like a blow, each word hammering into a place I tried to protect. Applause roared. Brandon lifted his glass toward me, and to the room it might have looked like a gesture of inclusion, but I recognized the smirk behind it. It was his way of reminding me who stood on the summit and who remained in the shadows. My mother passed by my table. She stopped only long enough to murmur that I looked too summer for such a day. The faint scent of champagne clung to her as she moved on, leaving me anchored in the corner. My grandfather Edward was not there. Officially his absence was blamed on poor health, but I knew better. He had always despised shallow grandeur. His silence was deliberate, a reminder that true value was not measured in chandeliers or applause. It was then I noticed a man in a dark suit weaving through the crowd. His eyes were locked on me. He neither clapped nor smiled. He stopped at my table long enough to place a white envelope before me, nodding with an expression that carried weight, and disappeared into the crowd as quickly as he had come. I picked it up. The paper was heavy, embossed with watermarks. Inside were documents bearing my name, my grandfather's will, every asset of Harrison Global Developments. Every bank account, the mansion, the investments, all of it was left to me, not to Brandon. The date was from 5 years earlier, when my grandfather was of sound mind and full health. The signature had been notarized. This was no mistake. This was truth. An attached letter carried his familiar handwriting. He wrote of the future of the company and of his grandsons. Brandon, he admitted, was gifted but lacked compassion. I, though neglected, had not lost the ability to see people rather than only profit. That was why he entrusted me with what he had built. As I read the words, my chest tightened. If this all was genuine, then everything around me was built on a lie. My father's speech, Brandon's triumph, the cheers of the guests, all of it stood on false ground. Yet I also knew that if I revealed the truth here, in front of them all, I would never be forgiven. I looked around at the guests raising their glasses, unaware that what they celebrated might become the greatest mistake in our family's history. My father still spoke of Brandon's future, never imagining that only a few yards away sat the true heir to his empire. Years of silence and humiliation had been preparing me for this moment. My knees trembled as I stood, the envelope gripped so tightly it felt like a lifeline in a storm. It was time to tear away the mask and reveal the truth, no matter how much it shattered the world they believed in. When I stepped onto the stage, my father noticed me from the corner of his eye. His face twisted with irritation, as if my very presence threatened to spoil the triumph he had carefully staged for Brandon. My mother turned as well, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. The murmur of the crowd began to fade. People sensed that something unexpected was unfolding. I felt the cold weight of the microphone in my hand as hundreds of faces turned toward me. My chest tightened, but my voice carried into the silence as I introduced myself not as the heir, but as the son who had always lived in the shadows. I explained the truth of the documents I held, the will written 5 years earlier by the man who had built Harrison Global Developments from nothing and who knew the true measure of success. The atmosphere in the room shifted, heavy with tension. Brandon's face lost its color. For the first time in my life, my brother looked unprepared. My father stood frozen, fury rising into his veins until they bulged at his neck. My mother buried her face in her hands as though shielding herself from the collapse of the world she had curated. I read the key points aloud, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. $75 million in assets, the $13 million mansion, the bank accounts, the investments, all of it left to me, not to Brandon. My grandfather had thought of everything, down to the smallest detail, from the company's vehicles to the artwork in the house. Gasps rippled through the hall. Whispers exploded like sparks. Some of my father's business partners looked stricken, their contracts suddenly uncertain. Others stared with thinly veiled fascination, as though they were watching a stage play rather than a family unraveling. A man in an expensive suit stepped forward. I recognized him immediately, Richard Stone, the family's attorney and my father's old friend. His expression was serious but not surprised. He asked to examine the papers, and I handed them over, my heart pounding as the hall sank into silence, broken only by the rustle of turning pages. Minutes passed like hours before Richard lifted his eyes. His verdict struck harder than any applause. The will was authentic, notarized, binding. Edward Harrison had left everything to me, not Brandon. And, most shocking of all, the terms were to take effect immediately upon my 20th birthday. I was 19. Only 5 months remained until the inheritance became mine. The announcement spread through the hall like fire. Some guests gasped, others rose from their chairs in disbelief. My father clutched his chest, pale and unsteady. My mother collapsed into a chair, her elegance stripped away in an instant. But it was Brandon who changed most. My brother, who had lived his life so certain of victory, looked shaken, afraid for the first time I could remember. I took back the microphone and told them the inheritance would not be a weapon for revenge. My grandfather had not entrusted me with this legacy to destroy the family but to build. I promised that Harrison Global would not exist only for profit but also to serve people, to build homes for those without them, to restore purpose where it had been lost. The words calmed the crowd, though inside I felt the crushing weight of expectation. Brandon's eyes burned into me with a hatred so fierce I could feel it pressing against my skin. When I stepped down from the stage, holding the documents that had rewritten my fate, I felt lighter than I ever had before. The burden of silence and humiliation that had chained me for years lifted. For the first time, I was free to claim my own life. Some approached to offer congratulations, but most held back, unsure of what to say. What was meant to be Brandon's triumph had become his public defeat. No one had planned it this way, but it was clear to everyone that the course of my life had changed forever. A new chapter had begun. We returned home by different roads. James and Sarah Collins, old family friends, had taken me in their car. My parents and Brandon drove ours. Just 2 blocks from our house, James's phone rang. I saw his face change in the rearview mirror, and his wife Sarah clutched his hand. They said nothing, but their silence told me everything. At an intersection on Main Street, a pickup truck had crashed into our family car at high speed. The driver was drunk. No one survived. When I learned of the tragedy, it was as if the ground beneath me disappeared. That night shattered everything. The responsibility fell onto shoulders that were not ready to bear it. In one instant, I was left alone, a 19-year-old heir to an empire. The house greeted me with silence. The first days passed in haze. Funerals, people in black, endless flowers. Journalists crowded the gates, their cameras clicking without pause. Headlines screamed of the Harrison family tragedy and the young heir left to face $1 million empire alone. The company survived thanks to my Uncle Thomas, my father's younger brother. He had always been Charles's right hand, but never sought the spotlight. A calm and honest man, respected by all employees. After the funeral, he came to my house and explained the situation with clarity and calm. Harrison Global Developments was stable. It had a strong team, but it needed a leader. Uncle revealed what I had never known. For years he had proposed social projects, affordable housing for young families, reconstruction of old neighborhoods. The company's analysts had developed these programs. They would have brought long-term profit and a reputation for integrity. But my father rejected them all. He wanted money immediately, not years later. As I listened, I realized Uncle saw the company the same way my grandfather Edward did, not as a machine for profit, but as a means to help people. In the end, Uncle Thomas took over management, and everyone accepted it with relief. At night, I lay in the empty house, imagining what might have been if the accident had never happened. Years of lawsuits, Brandon insisting I was unworthy, my father supporting him, my mother torn between her sons. The family collapsing in front of all of Boston. But the accident erased every possibility of that war. It left only emptiness and a weight pressing down on shoulders that still felt too young to carry it. My grandfather Edward weakened after the funeral. Losing both his son and grandson broke him. Yet he still tried to guide me with advice. On winter evenings by his bedside, I began to understand inheritance was not only money. It was responsibility toward the people who worked for us, who lived in the houses our company built. I had 5 months until my 20th birthday, when I would officially take control. A short time to decide who I was, an accidental owner of millions or someone capable of continuing my grandfather's mission. The time left would decide whether I repeated my father's mistakes or found my own path. No matter how critical the turns in my life had been, I knew this tragedy might become the beginning of something new. I did not know if I had the strength, but time was moving. The day that would change everything was already near. Uncle Thomas took it upon himself to teach me during the 5 months before my 20th birthday. Every morning at 7 he placed 2 cups of coffee on the table and patiently explained the basics of business my father had never considered worth showing me. He sent me to accelerated courses in finance and management, and I felt as though I were taking an exam for the right to live. In those first weeks my hand shook when I looked at numbers with 6 zeros. My heart raced when Uncle showed me contracts that determined hundreds of jobs. But gradually fear gave way to understanding that these were not just numbers on paper. They were salaries, homes, futures. My 20th birthday passed without celebration. Only Uncle Thomas Sunday sat in the office of Harrison Global Developments with a stack of documents. When I placed the final signature and became the official owner of the empire, I felt no triumph, only the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. Our first project launched a month later, a program for affordable housing. The same one Uncle had proposed for years and my father had rejected. Thomas led the negotiations and presentations while I sat silently beside him, studying every move and every tone. The people across the table were not yet ready to take me seriously, and we both knew it. Grandfather Edward died in February while the first houses were under construction. I held his hand as he slipped away. In his final breath he whispered that he was proud of me. Those words warmed my heart, and the long nights when doubt threatened to suffocate me. At his funeral, the crowd was not only wealthy partners. There were builders, families from the new homes, students he had once supported. Looking at that gathering, I understood a true legacy is not measured in money but in how many lives you touch. The company changed under my leadership. We no longer built luxury towers for the few but homes for ordinary families. Every project faced the same test: would it harm the community, or would it help create one? Profits grew more slowly, but they were honest. A year later, the mayor of Boston awarded our company for social projects. The ceremony took place in the same hotel where Brandon's graduation had been celebrated. Standing on stage with the award in my hands, I looked into the hall. On the front row sat Uncle Thomas, his eyes glistening with pride. Beside him were empty seats where my parents and brother might have been. At home I often thought of them. The pain remained, but it no longer stopped me from living. It reminded me that time is precious and family is a choice to love every day despite mistakes and disappointments. Thomas became more than a business partner to me. He was the older brother I never had. In his presence I felt something unknown in childhood, the unconditional support of someone who believed in me. Now, as I record this story, construction continues outside my window. A new residential complex is rising, affordable, with playgrounds and green spaces. The workers know their labor creates homes for ordinary families. That thought gives meaning to work that money alone cannot buy. If you have read this far, it means my story touched you. Perhaps you recognize something of your own in it. Maybe you too live in the shadow of expectations or feel underestimated in your family. Here is what I want to tell you: your worth does not depend on the opinions of others, not even those closest to you. Family should be a place of support, not an arena of competition. If your parents cannot see what you see in yourself, it only shows they have their own limitations and fears. Do not let their problems define your value. Take responsibility for your life. Do not wait for someone else's permission to be yourself. Turn pain into strength, rejection into compassion for others who feel the same. Cherish those who are with you now. Speak your feelings, ask for help, offer support. Life is too short for silent wars. Your life belongs to you alone, and only you decide what the next step will be. Hey. That's it, today's story comes to an end. And honestly, thank you from the heart of the Redditor-X-Tales family for staying with us until the very last word. We at Redditor-X-Tales love to know what you think really. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read them all. And trust me, your words mean more than you realize. If you're hungry for more, the full playlist is waiting in the description. And don't worry, new true stories are already on the way. The Redditor-X-Tales family can't wait to share them with you. If this journey touched you even a little, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you'll never miss the next story. Once again, thank you for listening. Until next time, take care.